Today is from Micah chapter 6, verses 6 through 8. With what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before God on high? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has told you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God.
The Gospel of Matthew, chapter 25, starting with verse 14. Jesus is talking to his disciples and telling them, what is the kingdom of heaven like? And Jesus responds, for it is if a man going on a journey summoned his slaves and entrusted property to them. And to one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, and to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. The one who had received 5 talents went off at once and traded with them and made 5 more talents. In the same way, the one who had 2 talents made 2 more. But the one who had received the 1 talent went off and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those slaves came and settled accounts with them. Then the one who had received 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 more talents, and saying, Master, you handed over to me 5 talents. See, I have made 5 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and trusty slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. And the one with the 2 talents also came forward, saying, Master, you handed to me 2 talents. See, I have made 2 more talents. Master said to him, Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I'll put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. Then the one who received the 1 talent also came forward, saying, Master, I knew you were a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you did not scatter seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here, you can have what is yours. But the master replied, You wicked and lazy slave, you knew, did you, that I reap where I do not sow and I gather where I do not scatter? Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and on my return I would have received what was my own, at least with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to the one with the 10 talents. For to all those who have, more will be given, and they will have an abundance. From those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. As for this worthless slave, throw him into outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. I got a little scared at the end of this. Are you a risk taker? Know anybody who is? There's a young man in the 82nd Airborne Division. He was assigned to their jump school. He asked his recruiter what he could expect at jump school. The recruiter said, it's 3 weeks long. Okay, well, that's not bad. What else can you tell me? Well, the first week, they separate the men from the boys. Second week, they separate the men from the fools. Well, what about the third week? The soldier asked. Well, the third week, the fools jump. And if I could have said that with a straight face, straight through, it would have worked a little better. Let me ask you this. Does jumping out of an airplane appeal to you? No. Are you one of the fools? Yeah, me neither. Well, how about jumping over a wall instead? I was looking online, of course, there was a video of a skateboarder who jumped over the Great Wall of China in 2009. He became the first person to clear the wall without motorized aid. Danny Wall, the 30-year-old, completed the jump across the 61-foot gap 4 times. The last 3 times, he also added a 360-degree spin. He said, "I was aware of the dangers, but my heart was pumping in my chest the whole time." Could you jump over the Wall of China? Or how about Philippe Petit, who in 1974 made an unauthorized tightrope walk between the 2 Twin Towers in New York? You want to do that on a tightrope? Or 63-year-old Annie Edson Taylor, who in 1901 was the first person, man or woman, to go over Niagara Falls in a barrel and survive. You know, I don't know if it's more crazy or amazing to me. First of all, that they were successful, and secondly, that they would take those kinds of risks in the first place. So how about you? What kind of risk taker are you? Our text this morning is about 2 risk takers and, well, one not so much. You just heard the story. A wealthy guy goes on a trip and leaves each of his 3 servants with a boatload of money to take care of while he is gone. He gives one 5 talents, one 2, and one just 1. Now, you need to know that a talent is about 15 years' wages for the average person. So in today's economy, even the 1 talent guy was given about $750,000. This obviously is a parable. Both the first 2 double their master's money upon his return. Both of these servants, it was a leap of faith they took to risk, perhaps maybe even losing the money. But they did, and as a result of their efforts, they were able to give a really great report to their master when he returned. And he praises them profusely. The third buries the money. Now, he doesn't lose any, but he doesn't risk anything either, and he returns the full amount of the money that his master gave him back to the master. Well, the master blows a gasket and really is ticked off at this guy, reads him the riot act, and that's the end of our story. Well, let me make a couple of observations. First of all, it's pretty clear that the talents aren't distributed in equal amounts, are they? We Americans like to say, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men and women are created equal. Unless you're a Baptist. No, where is she? Just kidding. Now, that may be true in the next life, but it certainly isn't true in this one, is it? Equality is elusive, and even equality of opportunity is more rhetoric than reality. The reality is that you and I have all been given different kinds of talents, abilities, and resources, and none of them are handed out equally. There's always someone smarter, more athletic, better looking, more gifted, wealthier, and there's always someone less. However, if you notice, all 3 were entrusted with some amount of talent. Everybody in this life gets something. Nobody goes without. But even though all 3 got something, the master's reaction to what they did with their talents when he returned was not even close to the same. Now, we can understand him being pretty proud of the first 2 if they doubled his money. We don't know how long he was gone, but anytime your money is doubled, that's a pretty good deal. But how about the third? Why was he so angry with them? He didn't lose anything. He dug a hole in the ground, buried his money, waited for his master to return to make sure he returned to him what was entrusted to him. Now, you need to understand that back in Jesus' day, burying a treasure wasn't considered such a bad thing. For most poor people, that's what they did with their savings. And according to their laws, if the one-talent man buried the master's money and someone found it and actually stole it, the one-talent man couldn't be liable. In other words, this one-talent man took the safest, easiest way out. Didn't make much of an effort and didn't take much of a chance. Why? Because he was afraid. And he says exactly that to his master. Now, I also think that Jesus is trying to get across the point that God doesn't just look at your talent or how many talents you have. He wants to know what you do with your talents. Some people say, well, I can't teach. I can't sing. I can't play an instrument. I can't work on computers. I don't have a lot of money to give to the church. I can't do this. I can't do that. List goes on and on. Maybe they think they don't have as much to offer God because they can't do those big talent things. They don't have showy or impressive gifts. But this parable is saying, God doesn't care about what you don't have. He doesn't care about what you can't do. He cares about what you can. Parable is essentially telling us, don't just sit there, do something. Find something. Create something. Do anything, but don't just sit there and do nothing. And that usually involves some element of risk. We need to know, though, risk isn't a bad thing. I mean, you can't get out of this world today without a little bit of risk. When you love somebody, that's a risk. When you have a child, that's a risk. When you decide on your occupation, that is a risk. You can't hide from risk without stunting your life. Author Dennis Waitley once paraphrased a well-known poem by an unknown author to read like this. There was a very cautious man who never laughed or played. He never risked, he never tried, he never sang or prayed. And when one day he passed away, his insurance was denied. For since he never really lived, they claimed he never died. We often think of ministry as a solo venture. You hire a preacher and it's his or her job to minister to the congregation. And certainly that's true. But we often forget that ministry is designed to be done with others. For example, we forget that Moses was given a community of elders to help lead the people of Israel. Countless times in the Old Testament book of Exodus, Moses summons the Israelite elders to help him minister to the people. We forget, for example, that Jesus began his ministry by gathering Andrew and Simon Peter and later the rest of the disciples. Now, just how more ordinary can you get? I mean, here's two guys minding their own business in a boat fishing, and at that very moment they are selected by the Son of God to help spread the gospel message. You just never know when opportunity will come knocking, do you? Unfortunately, the most pervasive tendency of Christians today is to be reluctant servants. It's the belief that if God really wants something done, hopefully God will call on someone else more able than me to do it. I'm sure many of us have heard excuses from supporting the church by people with their prayers, their time, their talents, and their treasure by appealing to what they can't do or what they do not have. Oh, I'm just too old. Oh, I'm too young. I'm not really educated enough. Or I'm too busy. I'm not good enough. I'm too good. Well, I could never do that. When God asked Moses to tell Pharaoh to let my people go, Moses also used a number of phrases to complain about what he did not have. Who am I that I should go? Suppose they do not believe me. I have never been eloquent. After listening to Moses' complaints, God says to him, "Hey, Moses, what's that in your hand?" It was a staff. In essence, God was saying, "Moses, I'm not interested in what you can't do and what you don't have. I'm only interested in what you do have. Reach out your hand with a staff, and certainly I will be with you." And he was. And that's what this year's stewardship campaign is all about. Looking back with gratitude, moving forward in faith. We need to be grateful for all that God has done for this church in the past. But a bright and great future is ahead of us, and we need to step up. You're going to need to step up in the coming months. You're going to have to risk. I'm convinced that the kind of God people believe in determines how willing they are to risk great things for God. If you're here this morning out of fear, you probably won't enjoy worship very much. You're here because you're afraid God will punish you if you stay home. Still, God expects us to use what we have, great or small, to honor him, to help in the building of the kingdom of God, to risk stepping out in faith. The question I have for you this morning, both as individuals and for us as a church, is how do we perceive our Heavenly Master? And Glenda, here is where I'm going to make a little skip towards the bottom of the page, just so you know. The master wouldn't have been upset with the one talent servant if he'd just gone out and put the money in the bank to earn interest. He didn't have to try very hard, but he had to try. If he'd at least tried, the master would have been satisfied. And there's God saying, at least you can try. No, however, you might be saying to me, hey, Tom, the servant, that third servant, he had the right to be afraid. Look what happened to him. He did get punished. The master did turn out to be harsh. He ended up getting thrown out in the street and all that gnashing of teeth stuff. And I'd say to you, that was his own interpretation, his own perception of who God is that put him there, because that's the only place that is open to you if your view of God is of a wrathful, angry God. Right? If all we see is what God could do to us instead of for us, we will always be afraid. You put yourself in a place of torment. Now, if we look at the first two servants, they held a very different understanding of who their master was, and therefore they knew that when it came right down to it, there was really no risk at all. They understood that they served a wealthy, beyond measure, benevolent, generous God, as we do, who had given them and us more than they could ever think or see or imagine. You see, we serve a God who has blessed us with numerous gifts, and that the only risk we have is in not using them. There is no fear of messing up, because when you've experienced God's love, you realize that love is perfect, and perfect love casts out all fear. God's love is perfect. I've always heard that within the church, 20% of the people do 80% of the work. And I think that's mostly true. It's a noble thing that people are willing to invest so much time into the Lord's service. But the truth is, the Lord has given each of us talents to use in the service of his kingdom. Do you ever wonder what this church would be like if every single one of us used our talents, our gifts, our resources for the building up of the kingdom? You can start small if you want. There are lots of small things you can do. You can help pass the offering plates. You can be an usher. You can be part of our prayer chain. You can teach Sunday school. You can work in the nursery. You can even clean the sink so that the next person doesn't see what kind of a mess you made. The challenge for all of us is this. How can we use our resources of time, of talent, of treasure for God and for this church? At the very least, we must keep our promise to God when we join this church, to be loyal to it, to uphold it by our prayers, our presence, our gifts, and our service. But we can go even further than that. What is the special thing you can do that nobody else in the world can do in quite the same way? Is it a laugh? A smile? Is it the ability to encourage? Or how about to earnestly pray? Or a loving tone people hear in your voice? Maybe it's a skill in music or art or teaching or managing, or the possibilities are endless. As the prophet Jeremiah wrote many centuries ago, "For God knows the plans God has for you, to prosper and not harm." To prosper and not harm. To give you hope and a future. And you know what? You can't mess up God's plan. When it comes right down to it, that means there's no risk at all. You can't mess up God's plan. You just have to take the next step. We are called to be vigilant. We're called to step up to the plate and do our part, and probably more, but be not afraid. Yes, it's risky business, but God has trusted you, and God will empower you. So do not fear, but risk boldly. And may you be pleasantly surprised when you do. Amen. Our hymn of departure is number